Yeah, let's talk about why gardening is a good metaphor for the mind and why garden work is inner work.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a lot of good metaphors for the mind, but it's spring right now, and there's a lot of people out gardening. And I think working with symbolism and our internal state is really helpful. It can help bring some clarity to our experience in a way that's different than if we're just talking directly about fear, for example. If we associate our emotions and our thoughts and different aspects of our life with a symbol, sometimes those symbols can reflect things back to us that we don't even expect. So we can actually learn more by using the metaphor. And the garden is a rich metaphor to use.
Yeah, it's almost like a dream. It's like dreaming about a garden or dreaming about plants. It's like it's a metaphor that has meaning and some kind of lingering insight behind it if you just sit with it. And that's why it's like being out there in the garden, whether it's like you're growing fruit or food, or you're just, you're growing flowers or tending to trees or whatever it is. It's like it requires this kind of daily discipline, this daily awareness, this level of trust, this level of commitment, right? It's like it's all these things. It's not just going out and mindlessly wandering around. There has to be intentionality, all these things with it.
Yeah, I think too about like the power of a visual practice. I say visual, but I mean like in an experiential internal practice, right? The more that we can bring detail to the inner garden, and we're weeding, or we're cultivating the soil, or we're smelling a flower, and we can actually cultivate that in our inner state, in our mind garden, that's more powerful for change. Again, it kind of gets both sides of the brain, right? It gets the left side of the, kind of analytical, because we know that there's that metaphor there, but it also gets the right side of the brain because we're dealing with dream, vision cultivation. And yeah, it just goes much deeper that way when we're working with both sides of the brain and using both creativity and symbolism, and using sort of the rational analytical part of the brain as well.
Totally. But then also the body in a kind of different way, right? It's like it's a more safe way to incorporate the somatic thing, because when you're immersed in fear or trauma response or anger, those kind of knee-jerk reactions or familial kind of patterns, it can either be scary to confront those things, or it can be really challenging. But it's like if I'm digging my hands in the dirt and pulling up weeds, it's like there's some resistance there. There gets dirt under my fingernails and that kind of thing. But it's a little easier for me to reach into, soft dirt and pull up weeds and realize like, oh, this is my tendency to react when I'm in traffic or whatever it is. And, visualize throwing those out. Then sometimes it is if I'm in the throes of traffic and trying to tell myself, to calm my reaction.
Absolutely.
And I think what's more too is that when I mentioned this earlier, kind of the daily part of the tending your garden maintenance, then I remember that it's not just going to happen once. I'm not just going to like neutralize a reaction or in one fell swoop, like knock out decades of familial trauma with this one different choice. Like it's going to be a daily thing. It doesn't matter how many times I pull up these little shoots of St. Augustine grass. Every morning I come out and it's like, what the hell, and it feels like that inside too. It's like, how many times have we taken, 3 steps forward and then feel like we take 2 or 4 or 5 back?
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. Yeah. Our inner work is, I was just writing something yesterday that healing, like a healing journey, is the human condition. It is a lifelong experience that we're choosing every day. And as you're saying, the garden is a good way to recognize that it takes time, it takes cultivation, it takes awareness, it takes, kind of like a devotional tending to it. And the garden is a beautiful metaphor. Most people like to hang out in the garden. So, it feels good to keep going back to it and working with these things that can be more challenging, thoughts and emotions are more challenging, but it brings an element of levity and joy and appreciation and contentment, which is another layer that we need to bring to these parts of ourselves to be able to work with them effectively.
Totally, because it's not all just shadow work, right? It's not all just weeding, right? Tending the garden requires watering, and it requires fertilizing, and it requires pruning, and it requires all these, nurturing love, in other words.
Yeah.
It's not just because that's, I certainly get caught up in that self-growth and transformation is often like the ways I need to be better. And in many, I'm the older I get, the more that I'm in this work, I'm realizing actually it's about loving and nurturing the parts of me that just want to flower, and less about like focusing on the ways that, things are not right or not growing fast enough or whatever may happen. Because it's, as you referenced, it requires a lot of trust that all of these things that we're doing are going to eventually produce fruit or pay off.
Yeah, the seeds that you're planting, you plant it in the darkness, you plant it in the shadow. You never know what's going to happen, right? The shadow is rich medium for cultivation of growth, of flowers, blossoming, whatever it is that you want to create in your life. We have to recognize that the shadow and the birth of something, light or flowers or fruit or vegetables or whatever, those work together. If you put something out in the garden and it only has light, it will die. It will literally die, so it's great to be able to recognize that. The other thing that I really love about tending the garden too is inevitably when I garden, I'm learning patience, and there's a sweetness to the patience. It's like, oh, this little tendril, it's coming, it's going to come, and then you just see the first shoot, right? We don't do that with ourselves. It's like, oh, I just had this little burst of progress. It's amazing, but if you see a little bit of basil in the garden coming up, it's like one day old, you're like, oh my gosh, baby basil, it's so amazing. So we can also kind of extricate that joy and that appreciation that we have for our garden, for ourselves, for our own inner work. And that's really cool and really important.
Gosh, what a mindset to cultivate and to have kind of as a baseline, just joy and appreciation. It's not like this is a new concept. Oh, if I was more joyous and grateful all the time, my life would be better. But that's one of the ways that we can actually, viscerally, immersively practice it, is to remember it's like where in myself and my life and my mind are there little baby shoots just breaking ground that need a little extra nurturing. But that's part of what, just being immersive in the natural world shows us, is that not all things are going to be viable. And then that's okay, because they end up composting and nurturing the soil again. So it's like we have to be, when you plant a bunch of seeds, you have to prune and give the strong ones a chance to survive. So it's like we have to focus our energy on what makes sense now. If I plant a bunch of fall crops, in spring, it's like it's not going to have the same effect, and vice versa. So it's again that trust. Like, can I lean into darkness until it's time to start leaning into light, and bring that balance there.
Yeah, I love that piece around like not all things are going to be viable. That's when we're doing healing work, when we're doing evolutionary growth work, it's super important to remember that. And I have challenges with that all the time, right? It's like, why isn't this working? Or can get really frustrating. And with the garden, it's really clear to recognize, I mean, you can try to make everything in the garden work, but you will be frustrated, and so over time, it kind of wears you down and teaches you to recognize, maybe it's looking at quote unquote failure in a different way. You were talking about composting, and it's like, oh, it's not actually a failure. There's a learning there, right? There's a benefit there. Yeah, important lesson as we move through these journeys.
Totally. And sometimes the composting process is smelly. It's like, it's stinky, it's Sometimes it's hard work, but then sometimes it's also not at all. Things don't always have to be rushed. I mean, I have a big compost heap for the first time. I've been kind of sharing with you some about it. And it's the compost heap alone could be this whole separate like topic and teaching and workshop and retreat, just because there's so much in it. But yeah, it just astounds me how the quote unquote waste that's around can so easily and so naturally be transformed into something that's so rich and usable, and not just usable, but like spectacularly beneficial for continuing the garden process, and it's like, what would it be like for, I mean, not only me, myself, but humans in general to switch that mindset from just like this idea of dumping and wasting and getting rid of, right, the aversion, and getting out of that craving aversion kind of cycle, and realizing that, it's more of this whole kind of process. There's balance there. And that if we just kind of tune into the natural process, we remember that. And again, it's kind of the garden thing. It brings us back to our elemental roots. We're digging into the earth. We're watering the garden. It's got the fire of the sun, the air that's around that brings the freshness. It's like that kind of returns us to those things that are outside of us. It reminds us that we're all part of this big cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good to be in flow with our own natural nature.
Hey. Yeah.
Humans are nature, and that's important. And I like this piece around learning balance. Yeah. And that, I think when people think about shadow work, there's a lot of fear, and it is often this idea of like, let's get rid of that. That's a bad part of you. And it's not to say that shadow sometimes isn't painful or scary, but the process isn't such that we're extricating it from ourselves. I think we actually can't do that. It's a part of ourselves. It's grown into our nervous system. It's grown into our lives. And so this idea of composting it, alchemizing it, transmuting it into something that's beneficial for the things that we want to grow, I think that's where the real process is. And that's the love, that's the compassion, that's the empathy, to recognize there's nothing that we need to eradicate from our garden. It's all in service. It's all in balance. It's our work to figure out, how does this compost, and how, how is this like gonna deliver the nutrients for peas, for example, right? Like, and again, I'm using the metaphor, but right, like if I'm facing fear, recognizing like, what does this serve? What part of my life, what aspect, relationship, work, health, what is it related to, and what does it serve? How do we transform that into something that we can then move forward with? And it'll come up again, just like a weed. Here it comes again, because we're human, and that's part of us. There's this, well, in the past, people have called oil black gold, but now if you're a permaculturist, they call compost black gold. And it's an interesting, there's some interesting history there, but I kind of like the idea of the modern version, the permaculture version of black gold, which is to recognize that the darkness does have the light inside of it. And it's just our job to recognize that it's there and to cultivate it in a way that turns it into gold. And maybe that gold is, another flower, another plant, I don't know, or maybe it's more composting.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of reflect and ask myself, like in any moment, especially the moments where things feel challenging, things feel tight, where I feel triggered or inflamed, that I have an opportunity to compost something. And if I'm just choosing to throw it in the trash and kind of avoid that experience, it's like, it really is just kind of like, tossing something in the garbage instead of choosing to kind of break it down and integrate it and, let it become soil again. And it's not to say that we have to always be digging around in the compost and digging up seeds to see if they're sprouting, because we all know that doesn't work. But that, we can be gentle with ourselves in our contemplation. And just because we're taking baby steps doesn't mean that we're not, making giant leaps of progress. Kind of like, nature over winter, it takes a while for energy to store and then build. And then all of a sudden, within a matter of days, it's like everything's poof into green and flowers. And I have to remind myself of that. It's like, whether it's growing new seeds or it's breaking down compost, like sometimes I just have to stick with myself long enough for things to hit that exponential change level. Because it seems like there's plateaus for a long time during some of this, doing this inner growth and this work and this kind of undoing familial lineages of trauma, all the things that come into spiritual awareness. And it's helpful to see that the metaphor is true for both the breaking down process and the growth process. It's like, it's really the same thing. It's the same patience. It's the same trust. It's the same love and compassion. It's all the same cycles.
Yeah.
There's no light without darkness,
Yeah. There's this gestational kind of experience about it. And as you were talking, what sort of emerged for me in that is this this idea about working, tending the inner garden. And if you're lucky enough to be able to tend an outer garden, that can be another layer to reinforce this experience as well. But it puts us in accord with, it puts us in the rhythm of the earth. And I think that's also really important. We've kind of been touching on that here. We can get into this cycle in modern society where it's like an expectation, quick. And we can't force something to grow. It has to take its own time. And we keep coming back to that again and again and again. And it puts us, it humbles us, and it puts us in the time frame of the earth's rhythms. And I think that's really valuable in terms of like decreasing our stress even. And almost kind of like opening, there's a kind of falling into that rhythm decreases the stress. So there's a natural opening in us. And we need that natural opening for things to continue to evolve, right? Like a plant is not going to grow in super compacted soil, for example, right? So, that like, leaning back into the rhythm of the earth allows for the growth to happen.
Mm-hmm. I think that might be one of my favorite aspects of just ecotherapy in general, is the way that it slows me down to the pace of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that the planet is slow. We're hurtling through space at millions of miles an hour or whatever it is. I'm not a physicist. But there is this natural kind of balance and flow with the planet itself. And I think the more that we sink into that, it's like, that's one of the greatest benefits we can have just from, being outside in general. Even if it's just being outside for 5 minutes every day, there's enough of, a noticeable change that occurs over time. You can watch that. We watch that with the moon's phases. We watch it with the seasons. But when you get to have your fingers in the dirt and you get to experience watering and nurturing and pruning and caring for plants themselves, it reminds us that we have a lot more in common with them than we think. Because I say all the time, we grow like trees, but we expect, ourselves to grow like supernova, stars that are exploding into this grandiose death. It's like, okay, maybe, bro, but chill out. Because I'm more like this oak tree over here that's been slowly moving toward the light, and most of us are that way too.
Yeah, I love that.
So let's see, questions that kind of help people translate and maybe kind of practice with this. If somebody doesn't have access to a space to garden, what would you suggest is maybe a simple way that they could practice some of this stuff?
You mean like an external practice?
Yeah, that would help kind of then inspire the internal practice.
Yeah, great. You know, growing an herb garden inside your house, a container garden inside your house is a big, kind of trend right now. I think that that's great. If you can have access, it's just like right at your fingertips in your kitchen window, or probably even grow under fluorescent lights if it needs to. So that would be the thing. And sometimes in ecotherapy practices, you can also kind of at some time go out and wander around in a park or something like that, and just gather some items that remind you of the earth and remind you of your connection with nature. And that can, and you can kind of keep a little basket of them or something, and reflect on them as well. That's another way that that can happen. Do you have any ideas? Anything else?
I do want to say I love the nature keepsakes idea. And I have, little bits of nature from all over the country, because I love that practice of just listening to what calls. But I also love the practice of seeing the material that's there and gatherable as the seasons change. And so even, for the first time, in my life, I've really had a garden space. At least in my adult life, I have a garden space now, but for decades before that, I didn't. And so one of my favorite ways to just kind of tap into those natural rhythms was just to go to the same outdoor places consistently over time. And so I love being able to, there was this, we used to live in Dallas, and Dallas is a huge concrete jungle. And there was this little, very gross man-made lake, with tires and shopping carts and stuff, but also with these beautiful pelicans that would come to roost, once a year. But I have pictures of this little dock going out facing the water from all four seasons, and they look so dramatically different. Covered in ice and snow from this random ice storm in the winter, and then this deep, crimson in the fall and bright green in the spring. And watching that shift is such a beautiful thing, because it forces me to notice the small changes that happen that would have been beneath my radar if I hadn't been outside taking a walk in the same place for the 20th time, this summer, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's reminding me that I don't necessarily, even though I think there are a few experiences that teach us, like taking a seed and turning it into a whole plant do. I think that's the closest thing to real magic that I've ever experienced. But yeah, just being in the world long enough and consistently enough to watch the way that the world changes without us, and realizing and remembering that that is inherently part of our makeup. It is in the substance that is our bodies.
What you were saying, I think it's important it reminds me of another ecotherapy practice, which is sit spot. It's called sit spot, where you go out into nature, someplace that you love, and you return, ideally daily, but again and again and again, and you're picking up the changes that happen. And it's kind of like water that wears away a rock, sitting with the earth day after day after day. It kind of wears on us. It wears its rhythms into us. And there's deep learning there.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh, I've had experiences like that. Just Joanna Macy experiences, zooming way out in space and time, and just kind of exploring the magnitude of that, the magnitude of history, the magnitude of the amount of humans that have incarnated and then, reincarnated or left or become non-physical energy and part of this planet. It's so much to take in. The magnitude of life is so much to take in. But again, it's if we're not doing those practices, then we're not kind of taking our place in the ecosystem of the earth. We're not recognizing ourselves as a vital component of the global community that's very much affecting the global ecosystem. So the more that we're kind of recognizing, oh, we play an important part in all this, not in this egoic, look at me, I'm mastering nature, but in the, oh, I should probably pay attention to the way that I'm influencing everything around me kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for us to recognize that we're a part, to not just know it, but to know it in our experience, in our heart, in our bodies. That would change the world, really.
Yeah. Wow. And all of a sudden, it's almost like we're full circle, because it's like when we just step out into the gardening or planting or just working with nature in general, we have those immersive somatic experiences. They become, we take it out of this just bouncing around in my brain and intellectualizing things, and they become lived and real.
Yeah.
And we need a lot more of that right now.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.